handful of fantastic speakers. They all come from all walks of life. We may not agree with every single thing that they do with their lives, what the exposure they put out there, but we've got one common goal, and that common goal is the protection of children. The protection of children is the most important thing in the world right now. Okay, so our next speaker,
yes, all right.
Our next speaker is a politician, but he's a politician that we actually like. Leader of the Heritage Party, I'm going to introduce in a moment David Kurten. He has been the leader of the Heritage Party since September 2020. He stands for traditional family values. He stands for pro-freedom, pro-life, and his values include ending sex education in a primary school setting.
Yeah.
Yes. He's going to talk to us today a bit about cultural Marxism and how we got here. This is what's responsible for the demise in our society. So, I'm not going to say much more because David's here waiting, so can we have a massive welcome for David Kurten, please?
All right. Thank you so much. I like you as well. I love all that you're doing. I just say thank you so much to PCP Wales, because you are fighting cultural Marxism at the front, where it's trying to take over our nation and introduce things which we should never have in our country here in this century and in this decade. Woo! And we all have to stand up against that, and you are doing that.
Yes!
So we talk a lot about wokery, we talk a lot about political correctness, and I think everyone somehow on some level realizes that there's a lot that is not right with our society. There's a general sense of unease that we have today that if you grew up in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s you didn't have, because everything was just left alone. But there are ideologies now and forces at work which are trying to undermine and corrode everything in society which is good, and to invert all of our values so that what is good is, we're told that it's bad, and things that are bad we're told that it's good, and they need to be propagated and they need to be inculcated in every institution, in every area of our society, whatever it is, particularly in education, because one of the first areas of society to be totally infiltrated by cultural Marxist ideology. Well, what is this cultural Marxism? Well, I was asked that on GB News the other day. I was asked, what is wokery? Because I use that word woke a lot. We all do these days because it's a word to use. But essentially cultural Marxism, it's a series of narratives that says that society is inherently homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, racist, Islamophobic and whatever. And because of that, we need to change everything around in order to create equality and get rid of oppression. But it's complete nonsense, because our society is good as it is. We don't need to change anything, and we don't need to bring in these new teachings which are coming into our schools, in our universities and so on. It started with universities when in the 60s you would have had a lot of new subjects being created and introduced, like gender studies and race studies and so on, in order to criticize through critical theory the values that we had. So we're told that there's not 2 biological sexes anymore, there's 100 different genders, and you can change your gender on any day of the week according to how you feel. So you can be a man on Monday, a woman on Tuesday, a smiley unicorn on Wednesday, and a demi-dwarf on Thursday, and heaven knows what you are on a Friday. And that's the kind of nonsense that people get taught in universities, and it's coming down into schools as well. And they're actually taught this kind of stuff in science classes, as though this is scientific truth, when it's absolute nonsense. So we need to just stand up for what is just normal, common, biological sense. I say that as a former science teacher. I used to teach reproduction in school to 12 or 13-year-old kids, which is absolutely fine. because that's just teaching people about science at an age which is appropriate. And the people pushing RSE, relationships and sex education, often talk about being age appropriate. But what they're doing is anything but age appropriate. It is grossly age inappropriate. And in some cases it is degenerate and disgusting. And thank you all for coming out here and standing up against it, because we need to push back on this and make sure that it doesn't affect more generations of children than it's already affected already. Because I know in England they passed the Children and Social Care Act in 2017, and that made relationships and sex education compulsory in schools in England in 2017. Now, I think in Wales it was 2022, was it? The law was passed or something, 2020?
Yeah, January 22.
January 22, they passed a similar law in Wales, which goes way beyond what we even have in England. And in Scotland they've done something similar as well. So now we have sexuality being taught to 3- and 4-year-old kids and every age upwards, and it involves teaching children. I'm going to modify my language here, but they teach children things about touching themselves, which should never be taught to kids. Why does anybody need to teach this to any kids, whether they're in secondary school or primary school or kindergarten? It's so wrong. And it's almost unbelievable that you have politicians in the Welsh Senedd pushing this onto kids, in Holyrood pushing it, in the Parliament there pushing it. Shame on them. Nobody in their right mind would push this kind of stuff on children. We should just let kids be kids. So I say to the politicians in the Senedd, in any other body where there are politicians and MPs, take your hands off our kids. And leave them alone to be innocent and be brought up and to have their childhood, and to allow parents to be the prime educators of their children, which is the rightful order of society. Yes. They're trying to take away parents' rights to bring up their children as they see fit. And what parent would sexualize their children when they're 3- or 4-year-olds? No one. How can politicians, who some of them are parents themselves, want to implement this stuff in schools? So we have to stand up against it. I'm standing up in the area of politics, obviously, with the Heritage Party. And our policy is that relationships and sex education should no longer be taught in any school anywhere in this United Kingdom. As well as education being totally infiltrated and captured, politics has been infiltrated and captured as well, including all of the major political parties, which is why you have what I call the fake Conservatives pushing it in England, Labour pushing it in Wales, the SNP pushing it in Scotland, and the Lib Dems and Greens, well, they support it as well.
We want them out!
We want them out! So I know I can only speak for myself. In the Heritage Party, we're standing against this, and we want to challenge as many MPs as we possibly can in the next general election, so that we can have people in that building over there to say this stops in our country right now. But we have PCP Wales who are taking action in the legal realm and bringing this very, very important court case in Wales. And I don't normally support legal cases, but what they're doing is worthy of support. So I will give a little bit of money to them myself later on, and you know, if you want to do that as well, you know. I normally only raise money for the Heritage Party, but they are well worth what they're doing, because what they're doing goes absolutely 100% along with what we stand for as a party, what you all stand for here, and what all the other speakers who are here stand for as well. Thank you all for turning up, and let's take our country back!
Yes! Thank you,
Thank
David.
you.
Carry on that round of applause, please.
Hey, thank you. Yeah.
Woo! Amazing. It is so good to have some common sense in Westminster, that is for sure. And that's what it's all about, it's common sense. The first time I came across mine was actually as a 16-year-old. I went to college and I did sociology, thinking I was going to learn about all different types of people in society. Unfortunately, my sociology teacher was a very extreme Marxist. He loved Marxism. And as it was a new concept to me, I listened intently, but I was very confused because my teacher taught Marxism as if it was facts. He didn't teach it as one of many theories. He taught it as the only way to live. And he was very much against the traditional family. He believed that women were suppressed, men were suppressed, capitalism is bad, etc., etc. I learned all this and it almost did brainwash me. But luckily, I had 16 years previous to that living in the nuclear family, mum, dad, and 2 sisters. So I did have, I had the privilege of a childhood, and that was really, really special to me. Unfortunately, at 16, you know, I did start thinking, oh, have I been brought up the wrong way? Ideas did come in my mind. However, they were overcome. But now in the school system, they're going to be taught this nonsense from 3 years old. What chances do our children have? They have no chance with this education in the school. I keep saying education, it's not education at all, isn't it? It's not education. Move on now to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nigel Thorne. Woo! Nigel Thorne has heavily researched queer theory, and he's an absolute expert in this area. If you don't know Nigel, you'll get to know him now, but please do check out his YouTube channel, Turf Fan Man. And he does some really great informative videos, and we've actually got him featured on our website. So if you go to our website, publicchildprotectionwales.org, we've got Nigel's videos on there, and he explains he explains queer theory, the origins, the dangers. He explains them really well on the video. Obviously, he's not going to be able to go into all that detail today because he's only got about 10 minutes, but I'm sure he can give you an overview. So without further ado, let's welcome Nigel Thorne! Woo!
Thank you, Lucia. And thank you to everybody who's turned up today and is making a stand. Because we need to make a stand, because there is a moral vacuum at the heart of the Welsh Government. A government that has been in power so long that it's lost its moral compass. Our forebears would be horrified at the actions of the Welsh Government. Our forebears knew what is right and what is wrong, because they were well versed in a story that told them what is right and what is wrong. A passion story is being played out in Cardiff Bay. The Welsh Government are enthralled to a new religion, queer theory, and they have entrusted the creation of the RSE guidance and code and associated educational materials with disciples of the high priestess of this new religion, American academic Judith Butler. Queer theorists believe that power lies within language, and by forcing a change in the language that people use, they can change people's perceptions. Now, Judith Butler believes that to undermine heteronormativity, it is important to disseminate teaching that downplays the significance of biological sex and elevates the significance of a personal gender. And the Welsh Government have duly obliged, because in the RSC guidance provided for every publicly funded school in Wales, there are new definitions of the words sex and gender that must be used in the teachings of children. So the word sex is defined as something that is attributed to someone. The Welsh Government have taken a word that is defined as a material reality and have redefined that word as a social construct. The word gender, rather than being a synonym for sex, as it is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary, and has been defined for 100 years, is now an identity. The Welsh Government have taken a word defined as an objective truth and have redefined that word as a subjective feeling. They are seeding the idea in impressionable young minds that people can be in the wrong body. Now, all this was done covertly, with no explanation. It was a betrayal of trust for political ends. The actions of a Judas Iscariot. There is a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. Another acolyte of Judith Butler is Jay Stewart, the founder of Gendered Intelligence. In a talk, Stewart claims that it is a human right for people to be able to identify, to be accepted as that which they wish to become. Which means that is an obligation on all the rest of society, every single one of us, to deny the evidence of our own senses, to deny reality, to deny the truth, and affirm the lie. And this demand is being made by a whole army of gender revolutionaries, mainly young and radicalized people, Butler's youth, who see no social problems with people identifying as to whatever they wish to be. No social consequences whatsoever. The one Senate member on the left who was brave enough to talk about the consequences was Helen Mary Jones of Plaid Cymru. She was monstered by the gender zealots. And people asked why. What has she done? But they shouted out, deselect her, deselect her. Instead of being supported by her party and her leader, Helen Mary Jones was forced to apologise. And every Plaid Cymru candidate to the last Senate election had to undertake training from Gendered Intelligence. There's a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. So Helen Mary Jones's fate was a lesson to all other Senate members on the left not to question this new religion. They've been cowed. Like Peter, they're too scared to speak up. I have a message for those politicians. You were elected to serve the people you represent, not the gender zealots that will condemn you. People are being indoctrinated, children are being indoctrinated in queer theory now. How many times does the cock need to crow before you wake up? There is a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. So the high priests arrested Jesus and then listened to accusations, desperately trying to find something with which to charge him. The Welsh Government have appointed their own high priests in the form of the independent LGBTQ+ expert panel, a group whose members have tweeted or retweeted messages like Helen Mary Jones is one of the biggest transphobes in Wales. J.K. Rowling should shut the F up. TERFs have blood on their hands. The Westminster government has blood on its hands. The UK media has blood on its hands. that an article published in a medical journal that mentioned rapid onset gender dysphoria and social contagion was utter tripe with poisonous overtones. And from the chair of the panel, that inviting a member of the LGBT Alliance on a panel to discuss an LGBTQ+ action plan was like inviting a member of the English Defence League on a panel to discuss a race action plan. The people advising the Welsh Government are quick to judge and eager, very eager to condemn. There is a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. So the Welsh Government are elected to serve the interests of all the people of Wales. But like Pontius Pilate, they've washed their hands of that responsibility. They've outsourced their critical thinking and their moral authority to Stonewall. So Stonewall states trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary identities are valid. The Welsh Government parrot them. Stonewall states no debates with those who won't recite the mantra. The Welsh Government follows suit. In exchanges with Laura Ann Jones, Mark Drakeford doesn't listen, he doesn't explain, he is dismissive, and he is deliberately provocative in his language. There's a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. So this allegedly socialist government, who you'd think would be mindful of George Orwell's maxim that if thought corrupts language, then language can corrupt thought, have no qualms about corrupting the thought of our young people. They have mandated that every publicly funded school in Wales teach children that they have a gender as well as a sex. This is a dangerous lie. There is a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay, and the crucified body of Christ will be seen in the messed up minds and medicalized and mutilated bodies of our most vulnerable children. So it's time for the people of Wales, the parents of Wales, to speak up and demand that their children will not be lied to. It is time for the teachers of Wales to stand up and demand that they will not lie to children in their care. It is time for the children of Wales to stand up and insist that they have the right to tell the truth. It is time for the people of Wales, of all faiths and none, of all parties and none, of all ages, all sexualities, all colours, to stand up and affirm the truth. There's a passion story being played out in Cardiff Bay. Our children will not be sacrificed on the cross of a woke ideology.
To our next speaker. Our next speaker, the lovely Lisa Nolland. She is a sex historian. Yeah, massive round of applause, Lisa Nolland. She's a sex historian and the CEO of Marriage, Sex and Culture Group in London. She's tracked the pansexual revolution and deeply concerned about its toxic impact on cognitive, moral and psychosexual development of children and adolescents, as we all are. So today Lisa's going to be speaking about Alfred Kinsey. She's probably not going to go in as much detail as she'd wish because of obviously there's children around, but she's going to be talking a bit about the Kinsey Institute and why we are here fighting a disgusting sex education. So if we can have a massive round of applause for Lisa Nolland. Woo!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Folks, I am feeling dreadful, so I will stick close to my script. But before I do anything, I want to show you a book that has been called Another Atom Bomb, and it's this one. Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. Kinsey, Pomeroy, and Martin, 1948. One of the reasons why I do 60 hours a week on a good week is because of this book. We are here in large part, in my view, because of Kinsey. So, to that end, I will start. I'm appalled by comprehensive sexuality education. For starters, it's not remotely comprehensive. No, no, no. It ignores inconvenient biological realities, huge numbers of them. It promotes extreme high-risk behaviors and downplays the roadkill. If I may, I'm digressing here. I will tell you a little story about what happened to me a few years back. I was at an alternative radio station in a very interesting part of town. I was across the street, the table from a 40-year-old who was kind of interested in having some fun, and a little 20-year-old who was his PA. I thought we were going to be speaking about ABC. No, no, no. He ended up grilling me on XYZ. The interview was so bad that he ends up getting up, leaving, very unhappy with me, because I'm this right-wing prude, and he's able to sexually liberate, explore, etc. Well, he goes off, and the little 20-year-old says to me, you know, I actually agreed with quite a bit of what you said. And I went, what? You're kidding. Why? I wasn't even convincing myself. She said, well, one of my mates, close mates, has herpes. That's been a game changer. And the rest of us just want to find normal guys to have a normal relationship with. And we can't find any. So you see, the 40-year-old is too tired, too smart, too sensible to practice what he preached. But the 20-year-old had taken the advice. And she and her mates got to pay for it. Now, in my view, that is not okay. That is all wrong. And this CSE is, so this is a few years ago, this CSE is much worse now. So we're talking about roadkill, etc. So, however, now, why am I talking about Kinsey? The reason why CSE has done so well is because it's been based on this illegitimate research by Alfred Kinsey. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so Alfred Kinsey. Irish actor Liam Neeson. How many of you saw Kinsey in 2004? Did anyone see that? Yeah, a few? Yeah, right. Supposedly, Kinsey was the brave the brave scientific pioneer determined to liberate sex from its dark, guilt-ridden religious past. Oh, wow. And promote happy, healthy, enlightened sexuality. What's not to like? Well, actually, quite a bit, because that film sanitized a huge amount of Kinsey's life. Now, I'm not going to go into everything, but you do need to know a bit more about Kinsey, because one of the problems, why are we here, is because our side hasn't known how bad Kinsey actually is. Okay, so. He was not a medical doctor. Let's just start there. He was an entomologist. That is an insect specialist. He specialized, thank you. He specialized in wasps, 8 million of them. Contra the publicity, his clinical research was ideologically or religiously driven. Skeptics were ignored as the media pumped out 24/7 how wonderful his conclusions were. So Far from his public persona as a neutral, disinterested observer, people, this is really important. He totally conned the world. He was personally involved. He was a masochist, an exhibitionist, and a voyeur. He would insert increasingly larger, harder, even bristly objects like pencils and toothbrushes into his urethra while masturbating. He was proud of his large genitalia. I'm not making this up. He loved being filmed in the act and watching his wife, colleagues, and their wives perform for his camera in his soundproof attic. At a low point, he suspended himself, and again, this is sadly all too accurate, himself in the air by a rope tied round his scrotum. I'll let that sink in. Another time, he climbed into the bathtub and removed his foreskin without anesthetic. So he was a masochist. That means he needs pain to climax.
Why did he chop his head off?
I'm telling you this because it comes into the story in a moment. Okay, so far, and also far from his public persona as a monogamous husband, he had hundreds, probably more, of male partners, etc. And he struggled with impotence. Very few people know this is the end result of this sexual guru. So sadly, his religion is now embedded in CSE, in youngsters' moral, cognitive, and psychosexual development. That's what's really scary. I wouldn't be doing this if it was just about adults, but it's not. They're getting at the next generation. Remember, kids are wet cement. They are literally reforming. We didn't get taught this stuff. Okay, right. So now, why I'm talking about Kinsey so much here is Kinsey's research is used to legitimize CSE. Now, one of his famous Table 34, this is in his book here, it claims children are sexual from birth, and that, people, is what we keep coming up against. Ah, don't you know, children are sexual from birth. Ah, haven't you heard, children are sexual from birth. See, that's what we are up against. Okay, now, this is his research. Please, again, it's right in there. Anyone can read it. Yeah. So table 34 is one of the many tables in there. This one table involves 30 babies and boys. One 4-year-old allegedly had 26 orgasms over 24 hours. Round the clock sexual abuse. At the time, and looking back, we see this research on children, quote unquote, is illegitimate, unethical, self-serving, unreliable, contradictory, and even criminal. He worked with a huge network of pedophiles. That's how he quote unquote gathered his quote unquote research. It's never been externally corroborated. It has never been, could never be replicated. Let that sink in. It's not been, other scientists have not done what he has said, what he has done. No, no, no. Now, a possible equivalent is like using rapists' accounts in research on women's sexuality. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here, as Kinsey was a masochist, remember we're talking about you need pain to climax. So I'm asking, were children's sobbings and violent convulsions interpreted as orgasms? That is something to think about. Finally, the Kinsey Institute forbids independent scrutiny of this quote-unquote research. That is the killer for me. No one else can have a look. So determining fact from fiction, from fraud, is impossible. I'm going to give you 3 other big ideas here about Kinsey. So you know when your daughter or son-in-law or teacher says, well, you know, children are sexual beings. No, 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 no. 1, His so-called research is ignorant of now well-known child and adolescent development principles. Children are not mini adults. Adolescents are not mini adults. Children, adolescents, adults, they all have different age stage challenges. For Kinsey, they were all adults. Number 2, children are not sexual beings. Though they may be capable of sensations in their genitals, they have only an incipient sexuality. The makings of it, of course they do, but they are not sexual partners. Basically, Kinsey would have little babies with sexual partners, pedophile sexual partners. It's totally mad. And number 3, no child development theorist in the 20th century, except Kinsey, has advocated sex for children, let alone sex acts, adult sex acts with children. He actually thought that that was a good idea, that it could benefit children. Okay, sorry, do you want me, sorry. Yeah, okay, fine. Do you want to know what I think kids should be taught?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. 1, depending on age stage. 1, sex is fab. Kinsey was right on that. He was dead right. We love sex. 2, sex is big. One sex act gone wrong can be a life changer. 3, sex is glue. Do the biochemistry. See, I don't do religion, I don't do morality, I do the science. And that's what we are constantly saying. Do the science. Kids deserve to know what's going on in their bodies. So in terms of 3, sex is glue. Do the biochemistry, oxytocin and vasopressin, among others. Do the science. Number 4, sex is fire, especially for teen girls. 5, sex is for later. Now, most people don't know, I don't know, maybe you do know this. The teen limbic system, okay, it's in the middle of their brain. Sadly, it's their reward pleasure system, and it's sadly fully developed. Unlike their PFC, it's this bit, their prefrontal cortex. This does not fully develop until their early to mid-20s. We know that now. So to say to a child, an adolescent, oh, you're fully mature, you're ready to make wise decisions. No, no, no. There are many other reasons too. I don't have time. Number 6, and I'm sorry to go here, but you do need to know. Some sex acts are very high risk, and our kids are being taught how to do them, quote, safely, which is a complete oxymoron. So again, do the biology. So I'll give you a few things that you need to know. The fragile anal sphincter muscle, the M cells. I haven't heard any sex ed person talk about the M cells. This is very important in terms of people's bodies. We all have them, M cells. Low pH factors, a porous thin rectal membrane close to the bloodstream, bacteria-laden feces. People, not all sex acts carry the same risk. See, Miriam Grossman, so she's, if you haven't heard of her, Dr. Miriam Grossman, you're teaching my child what? She goes into all the science. And finally, there's always forgiveness and a fresh start called secondary virginity. Use this experience to become a better, stronger person. A lot of kids have been duped. They've thought, oh no, it's not a big deal. Whoops. And then they get to pay for it. And to me, that is not right. Finally, a wonderful sex ed, because we are all for good sex ed, is called sexual risk avoidance. Email me if you want to know more. So it's Dr. Lisa, DRLISA 1957 @gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Massive round of applause for Lisa. Woo!